perché non entra l'acqua e poi, vede, che non tocca terra.
On November 30th, 1989, New York City became the center of a story that would shake the UFO world to its core. Depending on who's telling it, this was either the moment alien abduction finally crossed the line from theory to fact, or the moment a wild story spiraled completely out of control.
Dear Mr. Hopkins, my partner and I are police officers. We've been in a serious dilemma because of our strict profession and our lack of knowledge on this subject. About 3:30 a.m. in late November 1989, we sat in our patrol car underneath the elevated FDR Drive. There it was, a strange oval hovering over the top of an apartment building 2 or 3 blocks from where we were sitting, a very bright blue light coming from the bottom of it. I yelled for my partner, who was just as excited as I was. We were going to get out of the car, but what can we do for that poor little girl or woman wearing the full white nightgown? She was floating in midair in a bright beam of whitish blue light, looking like an angel. She was then brought up into the bottom of that very large oval, about 3/4 the size of the building across. This poor person was escorted out of a window by 3 ugly but smaller human-like creatures. After she was up and in, the oval plunged into the river, not far from the Brooklyn Bridge. Mr. Hopkins, the oval never came up from under the river. The guilt has lingered, and we find it difficult living with ourselves. My partner and I have been debating if we should seek her out. We know the building and we know the window. Perhaps she was just a figment of our imagination. If she isn't, is she alive and well? We have to know. If we should decide to seek this person out, we'll contact you again with further information if we do find her, and I hope we do. Many thanks, Police Officers Dan and Richard.
At the heart of it all was a woman whose account would divide believers and skeptics like never before, and a group of researchers who were convinced they were standing on historic ground.
Your feelings on the whole matter, I understand. As far as this tape is concerned, I've written everything down so that it'll be easier to express on tape. Please excuse my reading voice. The subject matter was the strangest ever in my line of work. Linda is a nice person. We saw it through all the discomfort she felt. Linda expressed the deep importance of our reaching you. After actually seeing her and speaking with her, we could see just how frightened and sincere she was. What we saw actually happened, and I hope that it doesn't drive me nuts. We'll never forget the look on her face. Pure white with no expression. A white mommy doll hanging in the air. With my binoculars, I could see 3 of the ugliest creatures I ever saw. I don't know what they were. They weren't human. Their heads were all out of proportion with no hair. The eyes were very large eyes. Those buggers were escorting her into the craft. Thank you, Bud, for keeping her in good hands. I don't know what you're going to do with this tape, but I do know it's all I can do for you, Bud, for Linda, and all the other people like her. Please respect the importance of our credibility of work. We just can't be identified. We'd be laughed at. Thank you, Bud.
Leading that charge was UFO researcher Bud Hopkins, and he didn't exactly play it safe. He called the case virtually immeasurable in importance, insisting it proved these encounters weren't dreams, delusions, or folklore, but real, physical events. Hopkins went all in, publicly staking his reputation on regressive hypnosis, the controversial method used to recover the memories, claiming it was completely reliable. No doubt. No hesitation.
I called Bud Hopkins the next day and told him what I had experienced and what I saw in my room. I wasn't asleep. I was awake. And, I went to his residence. We talked about it. Well, anyway, about 13, 14 months later, he received a letter from supposedly 2 police officers who said they saw a craft hovering over this building, saw a woman in a fetal position with 3 creatures, levitated outside the window 12 stories up.
And this wasn't some obscure campfire story floating around. Fringe forums. The case exploded into the mainstream, grabbing headlines in major outlets like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Omni, and even Paris Match.
I know what building that is. I've seen that building for years, but I've forgotten about it. Couldn't remember where I saw the light and what building, so I knew what building it was. As the light went back up to the window,
You okay?
I'm fine. Thank you, kid. It's good to see you.
You know what I'm gonna ask you?
Anything you can.
Don't say who he is, because if he finds out, he might sue you.
Oh,
He's a New York Post journalist. Tell them what he said to you. What happened to him? He was the one that...
You think I should worry about this gentleman? So before I tell this gentleman.
I'm using his name. But you know, that's up to you. That's up to
Thank
you.
you for the
But
consideration.
tell him about it.
Okay. Yes.
Famous journalist.
Yes,
From the New
Steve
York
Dunleavy.
Post.
He's a friend of mine.
Yeah, go ahead.
We went to different schools together. He's a noted journalist, and I've been in touch with him many times, so I have nothing to fear from the press. As a matter of fact, I welcome the press. That's why I'm here. Well, basically why I'm here is because I love this country. But more than I love this country, I love the Constitution of this country. And it's not being protected for my children. That's why I'm here. Now, Mr. Dunleavy was there, along with Robert, and everybody else in the delivery department. Bud and page 360 in a chapter called Expressways and Blind Alley, thought that the New York was informed, I guess, that the New York Post usually has a skeleton crew and there's not many men around. But this night was a famous night at the New York Post, which is the oldest paper in America. They inserted a comic section for the first time, so everyone who worked in the delivery department, the mailings department, the press room, had to be there at 2 o'clock in the morning. They don't have in the delivery department anyway. So you're looking about 60, 70 men in the truck. Plus the diner was filled with people working in the diner. There were many, many people, workers there. I found 3. Well, there were other people besides Linda that were abducted that night. Now, as far as worrying about my friends, I'm concerned about.
And I think we'll have to save that. No, the thing is,
No, it's okay. We're gonna talk about it. It's not ladies' night out.
Suddenly, a UFO abduction wasn't just tabloid material, it was dinner table conversation. Hopkins laid everything out in his book, Witnessed, the true story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO abductions, presenting the case as airtight and undeniable. But that book was only the beginning. The deeper people dug into the details, the stranger and more unsettling the story became.
November 30th, 1989. It occurred about 3:15 in the morning. I had just finished doing some backlog laundry, and I was working full time, and I had 2 boys to raise, and so I had all that laundry. Well, anyway, I finished the laundry and I went to bed, and it was about a week after Thanksgiving, and I don't know, I suddenly felt this numbness travel from my toes up, to the rest of my body. And I knew right away what that meant. And then I started to smell that odor again. It smelled like almonds. And so I said to myself, you know what? Before the rest of my body becomes numb, I'm just going to protect myself and my family. And I saw this creature standing at the foot of the bed. By now, my knees are numb. And then it got on top of the bed, and it crouched down, looked me straight in the eyes, and hissed. They hissed. It was gray. Before I knew it, the rest of my body was numb except my arms, so I picked up a decorative pillow, and I threw it at this creature.
You see, by all outward appearances, Linda Napolitano was just another Manhattan housewife, married, raising 2 kids, living a routine life high above the city streets. Nothing about her suggested she would one day become one of the most controversial figures in UFO history. But according to Linda, everything shattered in the early hours of November 30th, 1989.
And someone, one of them, comes over to me with this thing that looks like a pick, a dental pick. A pick. And he looks at me straight in the eyes. So eyes. Do you know that they look wet?
They look wet.
What are they gonna do? And he comes closer with his instrument and
Okay, now we're gonna turn that pain down very quickly.
And it fell back. And then I had that afterthought, well, now it's going to get even with me and hurt my family. By that time, after that, I don't know what happened. The next thing I remembered, I felt myself fall into my bed. It could have been from 8 feet or 2 feet or maybe even 2 inches, but I just plopped right back into my bed.
It was around 3 a.m. when she suddenly snapped awake. She was still in bed, her husband asleep beside her. Yet she felt a deep, gut-level fear she couldn't explain. Something was wrong. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she realized she wasn't alone. Standing over her were small, gray figures, thin, upright, and completely still, staring at her with large, black, unblinking eyes. Linda later said they told her to stay quiet, not with words, but directly inside her head. She tried to scream for her husband, but her body wouldn't respond. She couldn't move. She couldn't make a sound. Panic set in as she realized she was completely helpless. Then the impossible happened. A bright blue beam of light shot through her bedroom window. Her body lifted off the bed, drifting upward as if gravity no longer applied. She claimed she was pulled straight out of her 12th-floor apartment and into the night sky, floating toward a massive, oval-shaped craft. Once inside, the ship allegedly sealed itself shut like a clamshell, cutting her off from the world below. Sutu. Bored, Linda said she was subjected to what many abductees describe as standard procedures: cold, clinical examinations performed without explanation. One detail stood out. A thin rod with a small ball at the end was pushed deep into her nose. When they were done, the ball was left behind. An experience like that would leave most people shattered. Strangely, Linda didn't seem completely undone by it. Context matters here. In the late 1980s, alien abductions were everywhere in pop culture. Whitley Strieber's Communion had become a phenomenon, and Travis Walton's story was already legendary. These were stories Linda knew well, but what made her case truly explosive was this: she wasn't alone. Even at 3 in the morning, Brooklyn was far from empty. Independent witnesses later came forward, claiming they saw a woman lifted from an apartment window by a strange light. Some even said they captured parts of it on camera. If true, it would mark the first, and possibly only, time an alien abduction was witnessed by outsiders. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. Linda woke up back in bed beside her husband, as if nothing had happened. Her first instinct was to dismiss it as an incredibly vivid nightmare. That explanation didn't last long. Soon after, she noticed a painful lump inside her nose. She went to a doctor, and according to Linda, an X-ray revealed a foreign object lodged in her nasal passage. Later, a specialist examined her again and reported that the object was gone. But there was unusual cartilage buildup, the kind that suggests something had recently been there. Looking for answers, Linda turned to Bud Hopkins, artist, author, and one of the most influential UFO researchers in the world. By then, Hopkins wasn't just studying abductions. He was defining the entire field. His books Intruders and Missing Time were considered essential reading, and he had founded the Intruders Foundation to support people who believed they'd been taken. But this is where things get complicated. Linda wasn't new to Hopkins or his work. She had already read Intruders and had attended several of his support group meetings before her famous experience ever happened. In fact, it took months of meeting with Hopkins before November 30th, 1989. Over time, Linda came to believe this event wasn't the beginning of her story. It was just the latest chapter. She would later claim she had been experiencing abductions since childhood. Dig a little deeper, and more questions appear. Before settling into family life, Linda had worked as a singer and model under the name Lynn Long. She has always insisted she hated that period of her life, but for skeptics, it was enough. To them, any past connection to performance or attention made her story suspect. By the time Hopkins began working closely with her, his reputation gave the case enormous weight. He wasn't a fringe figure. He was respected enough to testify as an expert witness in court. If someone believed they'd been abducted, Hopkins was the authority. Hypnotic regression sessions followed. At first, the memories that surfaced were almost too familiar. Taken from bed, examined, returned home, even Hopkins reportedly found it routine. His former partner, Carol Rainey, later noted that when a case didn't stand out, he usually lost interest and moved on. But one detail changed everything. During the sessions, Linda claimed the beings spoke, though not in any recognizable language. The phrases sounded like nonsense. To skeptics, it was gibberish. To Hopkins, it was confirmation. He believed this strange communication matched patterns he'd heard from other abductees. From that moment on, the case stopped being just another report. It became the centerpiece of Hopkins's work, the foundation of his book, Witnessed. In 1996, Bud Hopkins released Witnessed, and almost overnight, Linda Napolitano's story exploded into the public eye. On the surface, it sounded like pure science fiction, aliens, levitation, a UFO hovering over New York City. But Hopkins insisted this case was different. What made it extraordinary, he claimed, was that Linda wasn't alone. Nearly 24 people, according to him, had seen it happen. Hopkins filled the book with witness accounts, carefully hiding real identities behind fake names. Linda herself became Linda Corteil. Most readers assumed the investigation began right after the alleged abduction, but Hopkins said the real turning point came 2 years later, in 1991, when he received a strange, unsettling letter. It was supposedly written by 2 security guards. According to the letter, these guards, calling themselves Richard and Dan, were parked beneath the FDR Drive on the night of November 30th, 1989. They looked up and saw something that froze them in place. A woman in a white nightgown floating out of a high-rise apartment window, escorted by 3 small gray figures, drifting straight into a hovering craft. They later told reporters they were haunted by guilt, unable to forgive themselves for doing nothing to help her. But then came the real bombshell. They weren't alone that night. Their passenger, a powerful international political figure, had witnessed the entire event, too. Researchers quickly began whispering a name: Javier Pérez de Cuellar, the Secretary General of the United Nations. Eventually, Richard and Dan reached out to Linda Napolitano directly. When they met her at her Manhattan apartment, witnesses said the encounter was intense and emotional. The men reportedly broke down, speaking to Linda as if they had known her for years. For them, this wasn't a story. It was unfinished business. Oddly, they refused to deal with Bud Hopkins himself. They wouldn't meet him, wouldn't call him. Instead, they sent cassette tapes and handwritten letters with no return addresses. Their message was clear. Their jobs depended on secrecy. Hopkins claimed he didn't even know their real last names. At one point, Richard allegedly told him that any messages should go through Linda alone. Then the story took a sharp, disturbing turn. According to Hopkins, Dan became obsessed with Linda. Not curious, obsessed. He allegedly began watching her apartment every day. By April 1991, Hopkins claimed the obsession turned violent. The two guards reportedly abducted Linda, forced her into a car, and interrogated her for hours, convinced she knew more about the aliens than she was admitting. At one point, they made her remove her shoes so they could examine her toes, trying to prove she wasn't an alien herself. By October, things had spiraled even further. Hopkins claimed Dan kidnapped Linda again, this time taking her to a beach house on Long Island. Inside, Linda allegedly found framed photographs of herself waiting there, including one of her kissing her own son. Someone had been watching her far longer than she realized. According to Linda's account, Dan forced her to put on a white nightgown, identical to the one she wore during the original abduction. When she refused to change in front of him, his behavior turned frightening. He called her his Lady of the Sand, tried to sexually assault her, and when she fought back, attempted to drown her twice. Only Richard stepping in stopped it. Linda escaped and, according to Hopkins, showed up later that night, shaken, disheveled, and still covered in sand. Days later, Hopkins received photographs in the mail. Richard claimed Dan had taken them as Linda fled, and somehow the story still wasn't finished. By late 1991, Richard reportedly began recalling vivid dreams about a childhood friend named Baby Ann. When Linda heard this, she suddenly remembered an imaginary friend from her own childhood, someone named Mickey. She claimed Mickey was Richard. From there, the narrative drifted into something even stranger. They began to believe they had been connected since childhood, bonded by alien forces. That belief eventually evolved into a claim that Richard had fathered Linda's son under extraterrestrial direction. Even more bizarre, reports suggested Linda's husband hadn't even read Witnessed, meaning he had no idea his wife was supposedly involved in what amounted to an interstellar relationship. Meanwhile, Hopkins received another letter, this time directly from Dan. He claimed he and his partner weren't just witnesses, but official security officers escorting a major world leader the night of the abduction. According to Hopkins, that leader even contacted him privately to discuss a mysterious third man involved in the incident. Linda, somehow, was able to repeat parts of this confidential letter almost word for word. Once again, all roads pointed back to Javier Pérez de Cuellar, but the official response was blunt. The Secretary General's office confirmed he was home that night. In 1993, Hopkins accompanied a reporter to meet de Cuellar in person. When questioned about UFOs, the Secretary General calmly redirected the conversation back to global politics. For most people, that would have ended it. For Hopkins, it confirmed everything. He later said that until de Cuellar finally spoke openly about what he knew, he could never truly be at peace. Things got even stranger when Linda Napolitano met with the critics of the case, Joseph Stefala and Richard Butler. Instead of asking how to file a report or press charges, she asked something else entirely: whether she had the legal right to shoot Dan. That raised an uncomfortable question. Was she avoiding the police out of fear, or because filing a report would expose the entire story as fiction? Meanwhile, Linda claimed Dan continued to contact her through letters, confessing his love and admitting to fantasies about kidnapping her. But the more investigators looked for solid proof, the more the evidence seemed to evaporate. At the same time, more witnesses conveniently emerged, each with a story that somehow lined up perfectly with Linda's. Hopkins claimed there were 23 eyewitnesses who saw her floating across the Manhattan skyline. Most remained anonymous, but a few were highlighted. One described seeing her suspended in midair and assuming it had to be a movie shoot. A New York Post delivery worker said he watched a woman float out of a window and vanish, an image that haunted him for years. He became convinced the public was being kept in the dark. Linda's son, Johnny, also spoke out years later. He described growing up in constant fear, trying to bury the memories. What he couldn't forget was seeing three beings standing in the living room. He insisted his mother would never invent something like this. To him, there were only two possibilities. Either she somehow planted the same false memory in everyone's mind, including his, or the experience was real. Then, there were the bridge witnesses. Greg Sando reported the story of a woman driving across the Brooklyn Bridge when traffic suddenly froze. At first, she assumed she had stumbled onto a movie set. Years later, she contacted Hopkins. When he mentioned a floating woman, she immediately reacted, then abruptly shut the conversation down, warning him not to pursue it further. A former neighbor remembered seeing a strange light, but couldn't place the date. For a while, she thought she'd been abducted too, until her young son made the same claim. At that point, she abandoned the idea altogether. Investigators later discovered that Dan and Richard admitted to watching Linda long before they ever contacted her. That raised another red flag. If they were so obsessed, why wait more than a year to reach out? And why write to a UFO researcher instead of simply knocking on her door? Their supposed government status raised even more questions. U.S. federal agents wouldn't be assigned to guard the UN Secretary General. That job belongs to UN security. Dan had reportedly been institutionalized, yet somehow still held high-level clearance and carried a weapon. A threatening letter he sent while hospitalized was typed on the same machine as his earlier letters and postmarked from the United Nations. The logistics made no sense. Either these were the most incompetent agents imaginable, or the story itself was deeply flawed. Skeptics argued there was a simpler explanation for Linda's vivid memories under hypnosis. She helped create the story. That suspicion grew when she admitted to deliberately spreading false information about her share of the book's profits. Years later, another disturbing incident surfaced. Linda arrived at Hopkins's home, claiming she and her cousin had narrowly escaped another kidnapping attempt. Hopkins demanded to speak to the cousin. Linda left, and minutes later, the cousin called. When the call ended, Hopkins reportedly realized the truth. Linda had been pretending to be her cousin. Despite the scale of the case, Hopkins rarely tracked down witnesses himself. Most contacted him through letters, tapes, and drawings. He never met many of them in person. When other researchers tried to investigate independently, Hopkins reacted with hostility, accusing them of being government agents or intelligence operatives. Carol Rainey, Hopkins's former partner, pointed out a bigger issue. The biggest names in abduction research worked alone, without oversight, without formal training, and without anyone challenging their conclusions. One of Hopkins's own collaborators even argued that Linda was justified in lying, an admission that did nothing to strengthen the case. Hopkins dismissed concerns about hypnosis, insisting the sheer volume and variety of letters proved authenticity. Rainey disagreed. She believed Linda, while not highly educated, was exceptionally skilled at spinning elaborate stories when needed. When Hopkins failed to locate Richard and Dan, he didn't question their existence. Instead, he concluded they must belong to a secret intelligence agency. And yet, respected professionals backed him. Harvard psychiatrist John Mack praised the work. Historian and psychoanalyst Charles Strozier believed Linda was genuine. Psychotherapist Gibbs Williams said her physical reactions during hypnosis couldn't be faked. So why do it? Rainey suggested money played a role. Linda did receive a portion of the book's profits, but it may have gone deeper than that. Over the years, Linda made increasingly grand claims about herself, from having immortal blood cells to being guided by aliens during 9/11 rescues. For Hopkins, the case cemented his legacy. But Rainey saw something else, leading questions confirmation bias, and a desire to prove a theory at all costs, even defending obvious frauds. Despite everything, Hopkins never backed down. He believed the story would survive scrutiny, no matter how strange it sounded. And that's what keeps this case alive. Not because it makes sense, but because it refuses to fully collapse. This man just released the clearest video of a UFO ever taken in the quaint countryside of Barsa Bolognese, where rolling hills met endless pastures, lived a simple farmer named Gino. One crisp autumn morning in 2011, Gino stumbled upon a peculiar find at the local flea market. Amid rusty tools and forgotten trinkets, he spotted a gleaming, saucer-shaped object that shimmered under the sun like polished silver. The seller, a shifty-eyed old man, whispered tales of extraterrestrial origins, but Gino, ever the pragmatist, haggled it down to a bargain price. "It's just a fancy shed," he muttered to himself, loading it onto his tractor. Back at his farm, Gino positioned the UFO in the barnyard. It hovered slightly, off the ground, defying gravity in a way that made his cows moo uneasily. Waterproof and spacious, it became his new woodshed, perfect for stacking firewood without a drop of rain seeping in. But soon, strange things happened. A low, hissing hum emanated from the craft at night, like a distant spaceship powering up. The cows grew restless, their milk production plummeting. Gino scratched his head, blaming it on his cousin's noisy tractor or perhaps the full moon. "No aliens here," he'd chuckled to visitors. "Just good old Italian ingenuity." One day, a curious reporter from a local TV show arrived, camera in tow. Gino proudly released his secret to the world, demonstrating how he'd tamed the UFO into a humble farm tool. He opened its hatch, revealing stacks of logs instead of little green men. The reporter laughed, probing about the hum. "Maybe it's calling home," she joked. Gino waved it off, milking a cow as the sound grew louder. Word spread like wildfire, online, and suddenly everyone had an opinion. Was this a real UFO, somehow captured and repurposed by an ordinary person? Enthusiasts jumped in fast, breaking down the crystal-clear footage and pointing out the object's pristine details. No blur, no glitches, just sharp, undeniable edges. Skeptics, on the other hand, couldn't ignore the comedic timing, the exaggerated accents, and those heavy satirical vibes. Still, I'll leave you with the same question everyone's asking. Are we looking at a real UFO caught on camera? Or just a very creative mortal having some fun?